The first time I met her, I was hooked. She sat across the bar, oblivious to my presence. A cigarette in one hand, she smiled and exhaled smoke into the air, and laughed with the fortunate bastard who sat beside her, hanging off her every word. He leaned in, tried to whisper something to her, and a sideward glance from her. He stood, walked outside and into the night. It did not take long before another took his place to be caught by her charms. The normally dreary pub had a glow to it that wasn't normally there. I couldn't hear what she was saying, even though I longed to. We didn't speak, not that I didn't want to. I've had moments where I've been driven by passion or lust. This was something I couldn't imagine. How could one chance sighting impact someone like this? I don't know what I did as the weeks or months passed. I would walk through the streets with fallen newspapers and idle chatter about increased death in the city. The city was going downhill. Soon all the activities I used to enjoy tasted bland, lifeless, and all the spark I had in my life was gone. My nights were consumed by her. I could hear her whispering my name, the feel of her hands on my skin, and I craved to see her again, no matter how much I tried to push it aside. I returned to the bar. It was less crowded this time, and sought her out. My body was twitching with anticipation, and like an addiction, one that never felt like it could be satisfied. I just needed to see her once. I sat at the bar on a wonky bar stool, mumbled something under my breath, and received some overpriced whiskey in a tumbler. I'm sure I overpaid for whatever swirl was in there. I tried not to look desperate, gazed at where she had been sitting, and her chair remained empty. It was nearing the end of the night. She still hadn't come. I exhaled, looking around the room in hope of seeing her. I waited until 3 a.m. Some would say this is the witching hour. The bartender and the rest of the bar staff were giving me dirty looks behind fake, polite, professional smiles. The bartender scrubbed a tumbler, glaring at me as his smile never reached his eyes. I was being an asshole, and I knew it.
Hey, we're closing soon.
Wendy, the blonde-haired waitress, stood at my side, with a small collection of used glasses on a tray. There were dark circles under her eyes. She had been here all night, and usually I would have made small talk with her. I'd certainly overstayed my welcome. I stood, made my apologies, and went to hand her some cash for the tip. I fumbled, and it dropped on the tray instead of her hand. I murmured sorry under my breath, and left. It was late. There were people around, and each of them were quickly making their way. I walked the relatively short distance home, pulled my jacket close to keep the cold out, and rubbed my hands together. The chill bit my face, and any other skin exposed to the elements. I should have left earlier. I saw her. As she walked between two of her friends, they were laughing, and all I wanted to do was speak to her. I stuttered a hello, and their laugh took on a malicious edge at my expense. She, whoever she was. The illusion had faded, and the 3 women drunkenly pointed and cackled at my expense. I tried to apologize and instead maintained my retreat. When I got to my lonely, cold apartment, I slammed the door shut and locked it, only to be berated by my landlord and neighbor for the noise. I drowned it out, numb. When it first happened, it was a surprise, but now being cursed at was part of my daily routine. I took off my jacket, shook the water from it, and hung it up only to have it fall to the floor. I left it there. I flopped on the couch, forgetting the beer or whatever limited items lingered in the fridge. Just what was I willing to do for one night with her? I leaned back, slowly blinked until I fell asleep. I dreamt that I was chasing her down a long corridor, long rows of doors on either side, and I never stopped to look at what was inside any of them. There were the girls again, their mocking laughter ringing in my ears, and I hated them. The trio blocked my way to her. My fists clenched, and a jagged, rusty blade appeared in my hand. It was black, shiny, and weirdly rusted. I grinned, let out a madman's laugh, and grabbed one of the women. I plunged the blade into her neck, again and again. The blood burst up into the sky and painted the hallway in her blood. Her friends screamed and ran. She was dying, and I kept stabbing her in her neck and chest. With a dying gurgle, I dropped her to the floor and followed her friends. I felt invincible. I caught one, pulled her backward, and stabbed her too in the chest. The rusted blade got caught and broke inside her. Tossing it aside, I leapt at her neck with my hands. I looked into her eyes and felt euphoria as life left them. I exhaled, chasing after the survivor, and found her cowering in the corner. She crawled away from me, pleading for me to stop, and my compassion was gone. My hands went around her neck, and I imagined her laughing at me, mocking me. I tightened, squeezed, and the more intimate it was, made me happy. I had strange sensations of fingernails over my skin. She stood in the hallway, faced me, a smirk on her lips, and delicate hands applauded my murderous efforts, taunting me for my success.
I didn't think you had it in you.
She purred. I felt torn between the real world and the fantasy realm I now found myself in. I preferred the latter. Would I do something so terrible in real life? I asked myself.
Yes. Would you? Would you kill for a chance to see me?
She answered, clearly with some telepathic capacity, and this startled me. Logic flew out the window, and I nodded my head. In a state between a dream and sleep, she wasn't quite visible yet, and a dreamlike mist lingered over us. I felt invincible. What would I do to see her? I would kill. I'd do anything you ask of me. All I could hear was my heartbeat. It increased, and I longed to hear her answer. Any answer. I heard a breath, and with a jolt, I woke up on the couch. I could feel the lingering caresses of her hands on me. I exhaled slowly, crawling with my head in my hands, and trudged to the shower, unable to escape the lingering feeling that I was being watched. Whenever I would turn to look, there was no one there. I had a nagging feeling I had failed whatever test was put in front of me. After my shower, I dressed and made my way to the local bus stop. I stood while the dawn crowd gathered, each person focused on their phone more than the world around them. Unfortunately, I didn't have that luxury, zoning out and looking up at the sky, wondering when and where things would finally end. There was a gaggle of Karens complaining about everyone, pointing out everyone's flaws and making an already irritable experience even worse.
Maybe you should kill one.
I heard the whisper and could smell the aroma of her perfume. I want to, but I can't, I murmured under my breath, wishing I could. So far, they left me alone and were busy bullying two teenage girls about their clothing. The girls had their heads down, doing what they could to avoid conflict, and I hated myself for not doing or saying anything. I had always been a coward.
Just one. You'd be doing the world a favor.
She whispered. I could feel her body pressed against mine now, and it was difficult to cope with in public. What if someone saw my body react to her touch? No, I can't.
Yes, you can. You just don't want to.
I do want to.
Do it. Grab one of them and smash their head against the wall. I want to see you coated in her blood. You'll love it. Your bloodlust will kick in and...
I don't want to smash her skull against the wall, I yelled loudly. Instantly, I felt all eyes on me. Their judgmental gazes lingered on me, and I felt crazy. The arrival of the bus didn't give me temporary relief from my embarrassment. Instead, I turned and walked my way to work. I needed something to distract myself, and God, I hated how I heard her mocking laughter behind me, trailing me no matter where I went. My pace to work was swift, and when I glanced backward, I could have sworn I saw her out of the corner of my eye. The weathered sign of Fuller's publishing house became larger, and as I pushed open the dirty glass door, I felt my stomach sink. My boss, a Nepo baby born with nothing but a silver spoon in his mouth, stood flirting with the receptionist. They humored him, giving me a fake smile, laughing at his bullshit jokes, and I tried to sneak past them to sit at my cubicle. "Steven," the prick called out to me. I winced, grit my teeth with my back to him, and turned. I wore a professional smile on my face. The pretentious turd strutted over to me. The gift of money and connections carried him the way it had his entire life. "Good to see you here. You're on time. I prefer seeing my employees arrive early to show how dedicated they are to the company. Friday's paper is due on Thursday. That's today. So you better snap to it or you're gonna be behind." His voice started to fade out. "I expect it to be emailed to me by 5 p.m. today, so you may need to skip lunch. I wouldn't want to see you written up or fired for something so trivial." I winced and rubbed my forehead. He noticed my appearance, and I admit I looked far from my best. His top lip curled with distaste and snorted at my expense. "Steven," the smug sound of his condescending voice rang out. "I expect my employees to come to work prepared." I muttered my apologies, anxious that I'd hear her voice tell me to grab his tie and choke him. How I loved the thought of making that smug, entitled little asshole realize what kind of garbage he was. I walked, got my mediocre coffee, and settled in at my desk. The computer buzzed awake when I sipped. I signed in and was bombarded with pointless emails. There was one that caught my eye and stood out from among the rest. "Stop being a coward." The subject didn't surprise me. I thought it was from my boss until I didn't see it come from any email. Spam, trolling, didn't matter. I sent it straight to the trash can. As soon as it left my inbox, another appeared. And each time I ignored or deleted it, another would appear. "Stop being a coward. Stop being a coward. Stop being a coward." I clicked on one of the emails. "Meet me at the Lion's Head, 3 a.m. Do not be late." I didn't answer. The day drawled on. I left the office and went back home. I opened my microwavable dinner, slammed it in, and waited for it to be done. I waited for the infamous and obnoxious beep, took the food out, and ate the boring food. When it was 2:40 a.m., I made my way to the Lion's Head, the same place I saw her for the first time, and logic told me I was being ridiculous. Police sirens buzzed past me as I heard that another body had been found. I didn't care. I just wanted to see her rather than the insistent fantasies that kept hassling me. I sat at the same bar stool I was at before and nearly ignored Wendy. She stood by my side, her hand on my upper arm, and gazed down at me with concern.
"Hey, Steven, are you doing okay? It's been a bit since we've talked,"
she asked. I remembered now. Wendy and I would sit and chat. Idle yet friendly chit-chat, the kind you have before becoming acquaintances and with the promise of friendship. At one point, I was a hair's breadth from asking her out before I chickened out. We usually spoke when I wasn't distracted. "Hey, Wendy, I've just had a lot on my mind. I've been busy," I drawled on. More and more excuses came out of my lips. Word vomit. I saw her. She sat at her table as though she never left. When our eyes connected, I heard her words in my mind.
You may approach.
I stood, mumbled a barely audible excuse as I pushed past Wendy and made my way toward her. I heard Wendy mumble something, and I stammered, sat down a little too loudly on my stool, and stared up at her. In the reflection of her drink, I briefly saw her reflection. Her true one. Large, twisted horns on either side of her head, bestial fanged teeth, and she was wingless. I was intrigued, never frightened, and her reflection turned back to her form.
You still haven't killed for me. Why?
She growled, more amused than angry. Her hand touched mine, and I could have sworn I felt a jolt. I don't know if I can. I muttered an excuse, scared to meet her gaze, and fidgeted with my fingers, biting my fingernails. The music and the sound of people talking was becoming unbearable. My head was spinning. She watched me. A fingertip casually circled her glass, and it was now when I realized she was causing my headache. It grew more in intensity, raw in pain, and I cried out loud. Fine, I'll do it.
Why don't you do it now?
She suggested. Her gaze dipped down to the small knife on the table in front of her. It was polished, with a decorative hilt, and had impressive craftsmanship. It was black and shone, the same one from my dream without the tainted rust.
Why don't you kill Wendy? She is worried about you.
She whispered. I noticed Wendy's concerned gaze. Whenever I looked over at her, she pretended to polish the bar or a glass. I had a feeling that if I didn't kill her, then the succubus sitting beside me would. I stood, hid the dagger behind me in my belt, and walked toward Wendy. Hey, I'm sorry. Can we go outside and get some cool air? I want to talk to you.
Sure. I'm due for my break. Are you okay?
Yeah, perfectly fine. Come on, let's talk. I said, my arm around her shoulder as I led her outside. Instantly, I felt the chill of the air and the commotion outside. I pondered what I should say, what excuses would make it easier for her while I stole her life from her and felt her claws in me. I looked down. Wendy glared up at me with these succubus's eyes, and her normally sweet expression replaced with one of malice. Wendy's mouth moved, but it was her voice that came out.
And here I thought you cherished her.
I pulled the knife from the back of my trousers, raised it up, and time stood still around us. I heard all the mocking words and taunting laughter around me. My trembling hand held it at her throat. I could hear her heartbeat and felt the excitement course through my body. I pierced Wendy's neck and gazed into her eyes. The succubus had left her, and she stood still, staring up at me like a deer caught in the headlights. The blood trickled down, causing the black knife to rust and sizzle. I was reminded of my dream. I kept slicing. There was little resistance as I moved through bone, blood, and tissue.
That's it. Keep going.
The whisper, that infamous sound. I kept slicing and moaned at the sound. Soon, Wendy's head barely clung to her neck with the smallest of flesh. She didn't fight me. I expected her to scream or try to hit me. Wendy's head flopped backward, the sound of pulling skin, and I didn't feel any different.
Do you think that is all? You need to find others.
Her words from behind me. I felt her arms around me. I wanted to cut her arms off and lower Wendy's body to the ground. The blood was pooling around me. Her touch left me, I felt her arms slowly loosen their grip and disappear around my waist, as did her whisper.
See me again.
Her voice faded out. I left the scene, leaving Wendy's body, and never returned back there again. I was the last person to be seen with her, and I couldn't escape the guilt. I had to go on the run, leave my old life behind, and for a while, I didn't kill. My skin would burn, fortune would leave me, and I craved to see her again. It didn't take long until I understood her meaning. I made my first kill, and so I must continue, or I will continue my suffering. I found another. I took my time. I took my victim to a location where we wouldn't be disturbed, using the same rusted black knife, and took out her eyes. Bound and unable to run, she screamed loudly, and surprisingly, it didn't hurt my ears. Also, I could hear her voice in my ears.
It is good to see you again,
She whispered. The only time I saw her was when I was killing. It didn't matter about the person who died. And so, I continue to kill. And I hope you can forgive me.